Welcome back to the Seedy AF podcast. I'm Jocelyn.
And I'm the Omega. In today's episode, we're going to tell you the stories of how we named our studio, our games, the characters we've created, and even our own pseudonyms. Now let's get seedy.
Today's questions came from our own team members. Our team member, Sanaya, asked, how did you come up with the names of your games? How did you come up with the names of the characters? And our team member, JV, asked, how did you come up with the name Vim Studios and the bull logo? We figured this would be a good opportunity to tell the stories of how we came up with our pseudonyms as well.
So for the name of our studio, Vim Studios, it's not super exciting. So I'm sorry to break any expectations you had with that. But the story behind the studio comes from a combination of a few things. One part is I almost made a business with some other buddies of mine from where we lived before, and this would have taken parts of that from it. Another part is from a cartoon that I saw on TV that was called Invader Zim from a couple decades ago. And I thought it was super cool, and it was just a lot of energy in the show. And then lastly, the V fits really nicely with what I'll get next to with the logo, which is the bull head and the horns. So that's one big reason why I chose the V for it instead of some other letter to start off with. And honestly, I didn't even consider the word Vim as a reason for picking it, even though it fits really nicely.
Yeah. I remember, you already had named the studio, when you started working on it, and I didn't really participate in the naming of it. But I do remember I always assumed that you thought about the word Vim, in the phrase Vim and Vigor. And that was one of the reasons that you picked it. And I remember bringing it up to you one time and you kind of looked at me blankly and I was like, that isn't why you picked it. And you were like, no, I never even thought about that. I'm not 100% sure that you knew for sure that Vim was even a word on its own. Yeah,
honestly, I may have read it once or twice, but not something that registered hey, this is what this word is.
Yeah. So it worked, like you said, it works out perfectly because, Vim, as I understand it, means energy or whatever. So, I think it works for the name of our studio. And as a little side anecdote, this reminds me too of we got 2 kittens at the beginning of 2021. Mm-hmm. And we had 2 of them. We wanted to give them matchy names. And I suggested Crimson and Clover because there's a song that says Crimson and Clover. And I remember you saying, oh, that's really cool. And you really loved it. And it wasn't until weeks later that I was singing the song or something that you were like, oh, that's cool. And I'm like you thought I maybe made it up or something. I can't remember how it went, but it was funny to me to find out that you liked the names, even though you didn't know that they were from a song.
Yeah, I had no idea about the song.
Yeah. So it's just kind of a running pattern in our in our history that you think things are really cool, and then when I think that they're a reference to something, they're not. You just think they're cool on their own, but that's cool too. So.
Right. Yeah. A lot of my experiences in life are a lot of silos that are put up in my mind, essentially. And there's a lot of stuff that's missing in between there, like you're getting at. So as far as the bull logo goes, I don't necessarily believe in zodiac signs or astrology and think that they're 100% accurate. But I will say that a lot of the stuff resonates, at least from my perspective, Taurus, for example, resonates with me. And it really shows with my personality in general, because I'm stubborn as fuck and I'm very slow to change my mind. It's something we talked about a lot before. And coincidentally, my daughter is also extremely stubborn, and you're stubborn too, but not quite as stubborn as we are.
Yeah, we all are pretty darn stubborn, and so it fits that your zodiac sign is Taurus, and that's where the bull logo came from. So.
And also, the bull is just super cool. I'm just gonna be honest.
Yeah, it makes for a cool logo, and then it works well with the V. So it all really works together, even though, like you said, it's not necessarily the most exciting origin story, but it all worked together for us, and we like the kind of synergy that it all has.
So the story behind the pseudonym that I use, the Omega. This one's not super exciting either, but the honest truth is I have this whole thing or complex, if you will, about people being oh, you got to be the alpha or the alpha this, the alpha that, and people talking about the betas and all that stuff. And I am very contrary, and I don't like to fit into these molds or anything like that. So I picked the Omega because I didn't want to stand with any of that. And ever since then, I really enjoyed the pseudonym, and I champion it, and I wear it like a badge.
And when I was trying to think of a pseudonym to use for this business, I ended up using a pseudonym that I used for writing. So I'll explain how I came up with the name, which was long before we ever did this business. But there was a time when we were thinking about doing this full time that I was thinking about creating a new pseudonym. And I think I was going to do Zeta, because that's the Z in the Greek alphabet, and Omega is also from the Greek alphabet. But I think we nixed it because we just didn't want to have like matchy names, and I just decided to use my own name. But yeah, there was a minute there where I was thinking about doing that. It would have worked.
I think it would have been just fine.
Yeah. We ended up doing a nod to that with the name of the sorority in A Shot in the Dark. It's the Zeta Omega, and then I just did Chi because it's an X and it looks cool, and I thought it sounded good together. And it's not an existing sorority, so I wasn't like going to be making a bad name for any sorority out there. But the pseudonym that I used, Jocelyn Stark, I came up with probably back in 2012 or 13 when I was writing romance novels. I wanted a J name because my real first name starts with a J. And so I like J names. I had a student named Jocelyn, and for more context, I taught English as a second language at that time. So I had a lot of students that were not from English-speaking countries, and I had a student named Jocelyn, and I loved the way that she spelled it, and it's an unusual spelling. And again, with a pseudonym, at least in my case, I wanted something that was a unique name, that nobody else had that exact name, but also wasn't a name that was super unusual and hard to remember. So I liked the idea of Jocelyn because it's a well-known name, but then the spelling was completely unique, and when I Googled it, like nobody else had that spelling. The last name Stark I came up with because I love stars. But again, I wanted a name that sounded like a real name. So I didn't want it to just be like Jocelyn Starr. But obviously Stark is, a common last name. And so that's how I came up with it. I did not know about Game of Thrones at that time. I think Game of Thrones was probably out like as a book series, but I didn't start watching the show until like 2016. So there's no relationship with the Starks or Ned Stark or anything like that.
I think deep down, she just really wants to be a queen in the North.
Yeah, probably. It was like it was a premonition about things to come.
You heard it here. We're going to move to Minnesota.
No, I'm never moving north.
So for the next part, we'll talk about like how the name of Prince Suburbia came to be. So one of the goals initially in my mind that I had when the name came to be is I wanted players to see the name and be like, okay, just at a glance, they know exactly what they're going to be getting into or have a good idea of it. And when you see Suburbia in there and you see it's a 2D game, and then also if you already know of Summertime Saga's existence, basically, then you're going to be like, okay, so hopefully there's some parallels drawn in their mind when they see Princess Suburbia, and they're going to be like, okay, if this is me looking for more Summertime Saga, I'm going to find this here. And then, like I was getting at, the whole aspiration to begin with was to be in the same vein as Dark Cookie's game, Summertime Saga, with the whole suburban theme. And originally our plan, our goal was to make an expansive suburban neighborhood with a map, just like on Summertime Saga. It was initially going to have a whole lot more characters just to, have something for everybody, but it didn't end up going that way, but that's okay because it still worked out.
For the name for A Shot in the Dark, we thought of the story for A Shot in the Dark in like May of 2021, and I think until like December or later, maybe, we didn't really have a name for it. We had a name that we called it that we can't say because it literally spoils the entire plot, because like we obviously knew how the game was going to end and what it was about. And so we just called it the blank game, and that blank being exactly what the game is. And so we can't call it that to anybody else because it would spoil the entire thing. But we unfortunately still have a lot of files and things like GitHub repos and things like that use that name. So it's a name that we use for it a lot, but we're very careful not to ever say it or show it publicly because it's very spoilery. But I do remember I had like a document where I wrote down like hundreds of ideas for names. And we really wanted something that conveyed that there was a mystery, and also that it had to do with photography, and that maybe it was a little bit darker, violent, and ideally, we would have liked a name that also kind of tied in the adult content aspect of it. And maybe Shot does, in a sense of like, especially because with the logo, I think there's a little bit of...
Yeah, the logo definitely adds to it.
The logo adds to it. But it was hard to think of a name that kind of did all of those things. And we were, A Shot in the Dark is not the greatest name in that it's a name of something that there's a lot of games and like movies and stuff out there that already exist with that name. And it's kind of a long phrase. We would have probably preferred like a shorter name that was like 1 or 2 words, but it was, you can't necessarily check off everything on your wish list. So it achieved the most things that we wanted to achieve.
Yeah, I think the reality is that coming up with names for these games it's difficult. Like you want to come up with a name that kind of sums things up very nicely, but it's not that easy. And then you also have to contend with the people that already have names out there for their games that will conflict with yours. So it's definitely something that requires thought. In the grand scheme of things, as long as you come up with something that's either catchy or simple or sums it up nicely, then you're going to be just fine. So you don't have to overthink it. For the Princess Suburbia logo, this one's pretty straightforward. With the whole prince, the royalty theme, we have a crown in the name. And then the other big thing that people, if you played our game, you already know, it doesn't take itself seriously. So it focuses on being silly and kind of bubbly and colorful. And that's what we aim for with our logo.
Yeah, it's over the top, it's heightened reality, it's kind of cartoony, and not just in terms of visual style, but also in its kind of tone. It's very over the top and kind of like it's cartoony. It's dramatic, like soap opera type. So for A Shot in the Dark, I played around with the logo. We definitely wanted something that had like the typewriter type to kind of give it that vintagey feel, since we were kind of going for a little bit of like dark or noir feel to it. And then the backsplash behind it was originally intended to be a blood splash. And then I remember you showed the logo to one of your friends, as we mentioned in the other episode, that was like, well, this isn't really my type of game, but when is the next update? So one of those friends, you shared the logo with them, and they were essentially like, well, the splash in the background could become. And we were like, it totally could. So then we made it an off-white color, and the rest is history. We wanted to keep it kind of monochrome, but it kind of worked out too, because it gave that word shot a little bit more of a meaning, like maybe potentially a dirty meaning. So that's where that came from. Although we did kind of steal like Auxiliary Out, our artist, was also working on a game at the time and had that exact color scheme of black, white, gray, and cream. And so I was trying to stay away from that, actually. That's why I did the red originally. I had like a blood splash, but it was just too good with the cream. So we totally stole his color scheme with that.
If you ever listen to this Auxiliary Out, I still want you to make that game.
Yeah, we still want you to make that game, even though we stole your color scheme. There's room for more than one game with that color scheme.
Next part, character names for Princess Burbia. I came up with the names originally for these characters. The way I went about them, my methodology was pretty simple. I either went with names that I thought were attractive and of women that I didn't already have present in my life all over the place, because that's when it can get kind of weird, I guess, at least from my perspective. Or the other way that I lean to is like, if there were any hot porn stars like that I kind of grew up or with and watched or whatever. One that stood out to me was Sarah Stone, and I thought she kind of fit Sarah. I thought the name was good for that. The only thing about Sarah Stone is she doesn't really kind of match the Sundare energy that Sarah has in the game. But other than that, I think she would fit nicely.
And then I'm kind of embarrassed to explain where a lot of the names from A Shot in the Dark came from, but a lot of them kind of started off as placeholders, but then we just got used to them. And so that's the names that they ended up with. Again, for context, we didn't have even a name for the game, and we called it the blank game, which like just, a very straightforward name explaining exactly what the story was. And so as I was writing the story and writing the original scripts, I would put like an A for the aunt character, or like an M for the mom character, or like a D for the doctor character. And then I ended up thinking up names that started with those letters, and then those like as the placeholders, and then little by little that just became their names. So that's where you get Ashley and Melissa and Delia and Paloma Ortiz are the same initials as police officer. So it's not super exciting, but that's where the inspiration originally came from. I also wanted the names to be kind of like relatively common or not super unusual names. I didn't want to use weird spellings because, something I've learned from the romance writing world as well is that you do want characters to have kind of unique and memorable names, but you also want them to be names that are easy for people to spell and remember so they can talk about the characters. And so that was important to me, was that the names be like simple enough that people could remember how to spell them and things like that, but not super common either. That said, a lot of the names too also came from like one way that I looked for names was to look at the US Social Security website. They will tell you the top like 100 names for both genders for any year. And so I thought about like what year were characters born, and then I would go look at that list and I would pick names from the top 100 so that they were, again, names that maybe aren't like, like super, super common, like in the top 5, but were names that, again, people will recognize and know how to spell. All of that said too, like I've written a lot of things in my life, and so I've had to name a lot of characters. And, in the past, I've leaned more into like, okay, I'm going to give characters whose names have like a special meaning and all this kind of stuff. And you can just really fall down that rabbit hole, and it can become like really hard, and you kind of become really attached to names that maybe aren't the greatest names or are hard to pronounce or hard to spell or, whatever. So this time around, I kind of learned from those mistakes in the past, and I leaned more towards again, maybe a less exciting or less like meaningful way of picking names, but I thought would be better for, in terms of reaching a wide audience and also people that speak lots of different languages and things like that. And then just a little note, this is kind of a spoiler. I won't say too much, but if you really want no spoilers for A Shot in the Dark, then just, fast forward a few seconds. But Ellie, we obviously had to be kind of thoughtful about her name because it has to be a nickname for another name. And also we had to think about a way to kind of obfuscate her last name. And so that was the one I would say we put the most thought into, was like how to deal with her name. But other than that, I mostly just picked names that, I like the sound of and I, thought would be a good fit for the character. So there you have it. Those are the stories behind the names that we've given ourselves, our studio, our games, and our characters. Probably not as exciting as you thought it was going to be. I wish we could say we had like super meaningful names that like meant something in some other language and we like put tons of hours of thought into it. But as I hope has become clear from our other episodes, there's like a million things you have to do to make these games. And so, sometimes like it's just a matter of priority. And sometimes the letters and names that you started using as a placeholder just become the names of those characters. But then you know what? Now those are their names and we love those characters and they're fully formed, fleshed out characters in our minds and we can't imagine them with any other name. So even if they don't have the most exciting backstory, it doesn't mean that their names, like we created them with any less love than anything else.
So thank you, JV and Sanaya, for the questions. If you have more questions you'd like us to answer, please reach out. We hope we plant some seeds with you. See you next time.
Bye.